If you're thinking about cruising solo, you've probably come up against what's known as a solo supplement. In other words, the added cost that a solo traveller needs to pay for the privilege of cruising alone. Over the last few years, I've taken more than 50 different cruises, and in that time, I've learned a few different ways to help minimise paying that solo supplement. One of the best ways that I avoid paying that supplement is to book a cabin that's designed for just one passenger, rather than being the sole occupant of a much bigger cabin designed for 2, 3, and sometimes even 4 different passengers. In this video today, I'm going to share with you 5 of my absolute favourite single occupancy cabins that I've ever booked on cruise ships, and I'm also going to share with you the absolute worst. Towards the end of the video, I'm also going to share with you one of my top tips that can often result in you getting a much better grade of cabin or stateroom than what you were planning on booking when you're cruising as a solo passenger. One thing that I've learned over the last few years is that the experience as a solo traveller in the cruise industry varies so much depending on which cruise line you opt to travel with. Some cruise lines out there host solo traveller parties, get-togethers, coffee mornings, you name it, they've got so much going on. Other cruise lines don't actually do anything to help facilitate solo travellers or single travellers mixing, so you do have to be really careful when you choose your specific cruise product. Hopefully today in this video and in all of my other videos on my channel, I can help you pick which cruise line might be right for you. On that note, before we get started, if you do enjoy this video today, and if you find it useful, then it would be amazing if you would think about supporting my channel by clicking both the thumbs up and the subscribe buttons. Now let's get started with my 5 best or my 5 favourite single occupancy cruise ship cabins, and we're starting with one of my favourite big cruise ships, MSC Virtuosa. I've cruised on MSC Virtuosa a number of times. After all, she was one of the few cruise ships that helped to get the UK cruise market back on its feet again following the pandemic and the subsequent close down. As a result of taking so many cruises on Virtuosa, I've experienced a whole range of different cabins on board, from inside cabins to ocean view cabins. I've even cruised in balcony cabins, but one of my favourite types of room on board this whole cruise ship is a single or a solo inside cabin. These rooms are small. In fact, they're a lot smaller than what you should expect to find in a regular Virtuosa cabin, but to be honest, they offer you everything that you're going to need while on board. From a bed perspective, you do get bigger than a single bed in these solo traveller cabins. One thing that drives me mad when I cruise on my own is when I go into the room and I find a single bed, because if I were to live on my own, I would always have a double or a king-size bed. I would never choose to sleep in a single bed, so I was delighted to find that on Virtuosa, they do operate with a much larger than a single bed option. The only downside is that that bed is pushed up against one of the walls, so you can only access it from one side. That isn't going to be an issue in here though, given the fact that you're the only person in the room. As someone who's cruised in all different types of cabin on board Virtuosa, I can absolutely confirm that all of the technology that you would expect to find in a regular balcony cabin or a regular inside cabin is also in the solo inside cabins, so you lose absolutely nothing from an in-room amenity point of view by booking this, which is by far the cheapest or most cost-effective way to cruise on this ship as a solo traveller. Now that's Virtuosa, which was coming in at number 5. Let's now move on to number 4, and it's a very different one this time, and we're moving across to look at P&O Cruises. P&O Cruises is a cruise line that services primarily the British or the UK cruise market. They operate a fleet of 7 different cruise ships, and within that fleet you've got some large mega ships, and you've also got some much smaller, much more intimate feeling cruise ships. The latter I'll take you in and show you later in this video. The ship that I'm going to take you in now to show you my 4th favourite solo cabin is P&O Britannia. I was able to book a balcony cabin on board this cruise ship, which absolutely delighted me. When I got to the point of booking my cruise, I realised that the corridor that I was selecting my room on had all single balcony cabins on one side of the corridor and all single inside cabins on the other. Their location was also absolutely fantastic because it was right next door to the Crow's Nest, which is one of the best, in my opinion, entertainment options on board a P&O ship, because it's right at the front, right at the top, with some incredible views and usually some really good live music well into the night as well. I love the thought of all of the solo travellers being located in this one part of the ship, because weirdly it felt as though there was a sense of community there before I'd even got onto the ship to see if that was the case. The room itself was really modern and I was very impressed with it. It was honestly just such a luxury having my own private balcony within this cabin, which meant I could do things like go outside and watch the ship sailing out of Southampton, or sit outside and relax with a tea and a coffee during a day at sea without being surrounded by so many other people. This was the first time I'd cruised solo in a balcony cabin, and honestly, I could really have gotten used to it. The biggest drawback or biggest disadvantage to this cabin type has got to be the single bed. I was so frustrated to go in this room and see the luxury of a balcony, but then a single bed right beside it. Going back to my point from earlier, I know nobody, I don't think I know anybody in my life who chooses to sleep in a single bed, even if they are single. So I really do think that these solo cabins should have a larger bed than that. That said, the cabin was really clean, really modern. I really, really liked the design of it. So if you are considering cruising solo, then P&O Britannia should be a consideration for you. And these solo balconies or single balconies should be on your list as well. Next, can we talk about a very different cruise line? That is Virgin Voyages, and let me show you a solo insider cabin that you'll find on board any of the Virgin Voyages cruise ships. I've stayed in these cabins both on Scarlet Lady, the original Virgin cruise ship, and also Valiant Lady. They're exactly the same on all of their cruise ships. You're able to book insider cabins, in other words, rooms without a window, and also sea view cabins, in other words, rooms with a window, as a solo traveller with Virgin. You can often sometimes find decent deals on cabins with balconies as well. One top tip that I would give here is that Brilliant Lady, the newest cruise ship from Virgin, has now launched with thinner balcony cabins, meaning that they might be a bit more cost accessible from a solo traveller point of view. So bear that in mind. The huge benefit to one of these rooms is that you really don't pay anywhere near the solo supplement that you would expect to pay to book one of the much larger staterooms or cabins designed for 2 or more people. Virgin Voyages, in my experience, are absolutely fantastic with solo travellers. There's so much going on, and in fact, at the start of the cruise, there's even a dedicated member of the crew who will help to get that solo traveller group mingling and to help integrate socially. It's fantastic. Now, the biggest downside to this solo insider cabin that I do love has got to be the size, because this cabin is small. And in fact, it's one of the smallest rooms I've ever slept in. The fun fact I have from staying in this room is that from every single point of the cabin, or every single place in the cabin, if I stretched one hand out, I could touch one wall, and if I stretched the other hand out, I could touch another wall. It really was that small. Now, that said, I was in this type of cabin for a 14-night transatlantic crossing on board Valiant Lady. By the end of it, I, to be honest, was finished in that room, so I would never do an around-the-world cruise in a cabin that small. But for the majority of itineraries that Virgin Voyages offer, I think these rooms are absolutely perfect, and you can save so much money as a solo cruiser. The question that I would encourage you to ask yourself here is, do you really need more space? When it comes to a financial point of view, which is very important for me, you can sometimes find yourself saving £500 or £600 or dollars on your cruise fare by booking the solo insider rather than a standard inside cabin. If you don't have a window anyway, and it's only you in the room, do you really need more space? One thing that I would give kudos to Virgin Voyages for in this room is that they've worked really cleverly to make sure that you still have access to all of the really interesting technology that they use in the standard cabins. For example, you can still control all of your lighting in the room via the tablet computer that you'll find on the desk. You can also control cabin service and stateroom attendants from there. You can also control your television, your air conditioning. It is very clever how they've managed to get all of that into such a small blueprint of room. So, Virgin Voyages, number 3, Solo Insider. Let's move on to number 2. My second favourite solo cabin on a cruise ship couldn't be on a more different ship to the Virgin one that we've just spoken about. We're heading back to P&O Cruises for this one, and we're boarding P&O Aurora. Let me show you why. P&O Aurora isn't a new cruise ship. She launched way back in the year 2000, but she underwent a significant refit a few years ago in 2019. One of the goals of this refit was to change the ship from being a family-friendly ship to an adult-only ship. This meant that some facilities, like, for example, the Kids Club, had to be brought out and removed from the ship, and in its place, they installed some cabins, including the one that I booked for my cruise, and I absolutely loved it. I booked a single balcony cabin down on deck 8 of the ship. This was located towards the back of the ship, and it had an enclosed balcony, meaning that rather than it having a full glass wall looking out, the sliding doors opened out onto what was a solid surface all the way around. It provided a perfect picture window for the entirety of the cruise. I absolutely loved it, and it was one of the most comfortable cabins that I've ever cruised in. These rooms' location at the back of the ship made them perfect for accessing things like the terrace pool, which is all the way at the very back of the ship. In fact, there was a door at the end of the corridor just a few doors down from my cabin, which took you straight out there. So although I was on a relatively cool weather cruise, I imagine if I was cruising somewhere like the Caribbean or the Mediterranean in summer, or to be honest, anywhere in the summer or good weather, it would be such a luxury to be able to just walk to the end of the corridor, push the door, and I'm by the swimming pool. You can find all of these new cabins on deck 8 of the ship, meaning that, yes, the pool is easy to get to, but you're also really close to most of the evening entertainment venues, rather than being multiple floors away in whatever part of the ship they've been able to squeeze an awkward single or solo cabin into. So P&O Aurora, a massive thumbs up for these single balcony cabins. So, which cruise ship cabin is my favourite as a solo traveller? Well, you might have known this is coming, because if you've followed me for a while, I am such a hugely loud advocate of this cruise product. But let me show you my studio stateroom on board Norwegian Escape. I took my first ever cruise on Norwegian Escape, and I tried a studio stateroom, which at that time was a bit of an alien concept for me. I went back more recently and cruised on Escape again to see if it was still my favourite, and the answer was absolutely yes. On board this cruise ship, all of the studio cabins are on decks 10, 11 and 12, and they're only 9 metres squared. So yes, these are definitely among the smallest spaces that I've ever stayed in for a period as long as, say, a week, which is how long I was on board for. But honestly, they don't feel that small once you're inside. Booking a studio cabin also unlocks so many other huge benefits with Norwegian Cruise Line. If you're on one of their larger ships that have the studio cabins and the studio lounge, then you'll have full access to a private lounge that's reserved to be used by only those people who are travelling solo. Now, don't worry, that doesn't create some really weird culture where everybody is single in that room and it feels a bit like speed dating. It's the opposite to that. What it means is that everybody who's using that lounge is travelling solo, or maybe they're travelling with a larger group, but they've chosen to book a solo cabin. Generally, I find that opens everyone up to conversation and just having a nice time in that lounge. It removes a lot of the awkwardness of walking into a public space if you're very aware of the fact that you're on your own, because everybody else in there, pardon the pun, is in exactly the same boat. With Norwegian Cruise Line, you can also book regular cabins for solo occupancy without paying a huge solo supplement. And if you book those cabins, and if they're specified as a single or a solo cabin, then you get the luxury of having access to the lounge as well. I recently booked a regular ocean view cabin on board Norwegian Breakaway and was really impressed with both the price I paid and the fact that it gave me full access to all of the studio lounge and all of the activities that were organised on board too. So that's my 5 top solo cabins that I've ever stayed in on cruise ships. Let's now move to the worst that I've found at sea. And for that, we're moving to MSC Cruises, which ironically is where we started the list of the best cabins. We're going on to a slightly different ship. Let me show you my solo cabin on board MSC Meraviglia. I opted to book a studio interior cabin on board MSC Meraviglia for a 10-night cruise out of New York City. The specific cabin I booked was 10004, and it was at the very front of deck number 10. If it had a window, it would look out right over the very front of the ship to give you an idea for just how forward this cabin really was. Now, location isn't the problem with this cabin. There were so many issues with it, and I've actually got a whole separate video here on YouTube, which you can find the link to down in the description of this video. Among the key challenges with this cabin were the fact that the sofa was a bed. There wasn't an actual bed in this cabin, it was just the sofa. When the sofa would be turned into a bed, however, it would then mean that you couldn't access the wardrobe or any of the storage along the side wall, because when you tried to open the door, you guessed it, it would catch on the bed. So you would have to be very clever with your movements if you were looking to cruise in this cabin. The other big issue was that this was a connecting cabin. Now, I don't usually have too much of an issue with a connecting cabin, but this was connecting on both sides. And while I was in the cabin on embarkation day, I could hear the people in this cabin and in that cabin, with me in the middle. I could hear them both having a really clear conversation, just at normal speaking levels. I was so concerned for what the noise might have been like later in the cruise. The more research I've done, the more I've realised that this cabin is actually sold as an optional extra room to the people who book the rooms on either side of it. It would essentially then become a sitting room that would join on to a much bigger family room, which to me makes perfect sense, because this room would be perfect as a little sitting room with an extra bathroom to help a family get ready. But in my opinion, it's just not suitable for an adult passenger to be staying in for the duration of a cruise. Now, I do want to be really clear that although this is the worst solo cabin that I've ever found on a cruise ship, I don't think MSC Cruises are bad for solo travellers. And in fact, I think they're one of the best cruise lines to cruise with if you're solo. Going back to Virtuosa, I've had so many amazing trips on that cruise ship as a solo. And since being on Meraviglia, I've cruised on other MSC Cruises ships, and they have delivered a really strong experience. So I think this just makes it so important to do your research and have a look at the rooms you're planning to book before you take the cruise. Because speaking from my experience of walking into that room on Meraviglia, it's a bit of a nightmare if you walk in and get a shock. Before we finish the video today, I did want to tell you about one of my top tips to often secure a much better grade of cabin or stateroom than most other solo travellers. And that is, at the point of making your booking, go through the price lists and check every grade of cabin, because sometimes an ocean view or a balcony cabin can actually be cheaper than a studio or a solo cabin. Now, why is that? The answer is really easy, and it's largely due to the fact that most of the cruise industry operates on a supply and demand basis. In other words, the more percentage of a room type that's available, the cheaper it will be. And as that then fills, the rooms will get more and more expensive. It's not just the cruise industry that does this. Hotels and airlines, so many other areas do this too. Now, on a cruise ship, there usually aren't too many single occupancy cabins. Therefore, sometimes when you've got 4 of those rooms booked, that's them now 50% of the way to being full, which will make the prices go up. I've seen it in the past where I've been able to save money by not booking a single inside cabin and instead I've booked a balcony, which is absolutely mad to me. And then I meet people on board who just had absolutely no idea that the balcony rooms were cheaper at the point of them booking the cruise. So please, before you book that single occupancy cabin, just check all of the prices so that you can make sure you get the best available cabin. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video today, and hopefully you've enjoyed seeing a whole range of different solo or studio cabins. If you have, then it would be great if you would come and watch another. I've got so many on my channel, but over in this video, I share with you some of my top tips for how I save money when cruising solo to secure the best fare possible.